All right, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a really fascinating journey into the actual mechanics of textual analysis. We're going to take a single, kind of bizarre ancient story about a piece of floating iron, and we're going to run it through a prism. By applying vastly different analytical lenses to the exact same source material, we'll see how the framework we bring to a text completely transforms the meaning we extract from it.
So here's our agenda for today. First, a trivial ancient miracle. Then, the metaphorical lens, followed by the academic lens, parallels of succession, and finally, the rules of interpretation.
Section 1. A trivial ancient miracle. 2 Kings 6, verses 1 through 7.
Before we even start interpreting, we've got to establish our baseline text. And honestly, it's the ultimate intellectual mystery. How do we actually find meaning in a 3,000-year-old story about a lost piece of iron? As our sources point out, critical scholars have long dismissed this brief account as just a fabricated legend. Something meant to inflate a prophet's reputation. And for modern readers, well, it can read a bit like an embarrassing pagan magic trick rather than profound theology.
So let's look at the literal plot here, just so we have our context. The followers of the prophet Elisha, they're known as the sons of the prophets, they realize their living space is just too small. So they head down to the Jordan River to cut timber and build a new place. But while they're chopping down a tree, disaster strikes. A really expensive borrowed iron axe head flies right off the handle and sinks into the water. The young prophet cries out in distress, and Elisha, well, he simply cuts a stick, throws it into the water where the iron fell, and miraculously, the heavy iron just floats to the surface to be grabbed. That's the whole shebang.
Section 2. The metaphorical lens. A pastoral application.
All right, for our first analytical framework, we're looking at a modern pastoral application from the Church Without Walls blog. Now, this devotional lens doesn't get bogged down in the literal physics of the miracle. Instead, it reads the text metaphorically to make it personally relevant to us today. It completely transforms that lost iron into a really powerful symbol for modern life, your spiritual cutting edge. The argument is pretty straightforward. Just like you literally can't chop wood with a blunt handle, you can't fulfill your life's purpose if you've lost your spiritual sharpness.
And this just brilliantly illustrates how the pastoral lens operates. It takes this ancient, somewhat obscure narrative and breaks it down into highly actionable personal life lessons for the modern practitioner. The blog outlines 5 specific steps derived directly from the story's events. Just as the prophet admitted he lost the axe, we have to acknowledge the loss of our own fervor. Elisha asked exactly where it fell, which translates to return to the source of our faith. The miracle itself tells readers to seek divine intervention, to embrace borrowed gifts, and ultimately to commit to growth. It's wild. The text literally becomes a practical roadmap for personal development.
Section 3. The academic lens. Literary analysis.
Now we're shifting gears in this explainer to a totally different analytical framework, drawing from a scholarly paper by Ricky Moore. And what the academic lens does here is absolutely fascinating. Rather than seeing a practical metaphor for daily life, or, just writing it off as a trivial magic trick, Moore's analysis elevates the story into a highly sophisticated piece of ancient literary strategy. To the academic eye, literally every single detail is meticulously placed.
Moore's central thesis is that you simply cannot read this story in isolation. To find the true meaning, we have to look at intertextual connections. He argues that the seemingly trivial axe head story is actually serving the overarching theological themes of the entire King's corpus. How? Specifically by mirroring another major event found way earlier in the text, the ascension of Elijah in 2 Kings chapter 2.
Section 4. Parallels of succession. Structural symmetry.
Let's actually dive into the specific literary architecture Moore maps out here. Notice the striking symmetry between these two events. Back in 2 Kings 2, we have an elder prophet Elijah and his younger follower taking a trip to the Jordan River, which culminates in a divine intervention that passes power down. Now fast forward to 2 Kings 6, we've got the exact same setup. A trip to the Jordan, an elder prophet, which is now Elisha, and younger followers. Once again, a divine intervention transacts a passing of empowerment. It's this incredibly deliberate shared focus on transferring authority from one generation to the next.
But the academic analysis doesn't just stop at the similarities. It looks closely at the contrasts to build a complete picture. Moore points out that in the earlier chapter, the transfer of power happens because the elder, Elijah, is permanently departing his earthly life, leaving behind his mantle. But in the axe head story, the transfer happens because the children are departing. They're coming of age and moving out. Elisha, who had to stubbornly wrest empowerment from his very reluctant elder in the first story, is now shown readily and easily giving empowerment to his own spiritual children by recovering their tool. So why does all this matter? Like, what's the academic takeaway here? Well, Moore summarizes that this generational succession is ultimately a profound theological polemic against the imported Baal fertility cult. See, Baalism claimed that Baal was the source of all generativity. Crops, rain, human reproduction, the whole 9 yards. By showing Elisha successfully acting as a life-giving father to the next generation of prophets, basically preserving the pilot light of success through this floating axe head miracle, the narrative structurally proves that Yahweh, not Baal, is the true source of human fruitfulness and generational survival.
Section 5. The Rules of Interpretation. Hermeneutics.
Okay, so we've seen a metaphorical application and an academic analysis. But what are the actual rules for deriving these meanings in the first place? For our final lens, we turn to Calvin Jones's essay on hermeneutics, which is really just the theory of interpretation. Jones champions something called grammatical historical interpretation, or, as he actually prefers to call it, scriptural grammatical. Why? Because he argues quite strongly that relying on outside secular history or science undermines the text's inherent authority. According to this specific framework, the text contains everything you need to understand it. Nothing from the outside is required.
In practice, this method relies on a super strict rule. Scripture must interpret Scripture. So the crucial point is, if a passage is confusing, like, say, a floating iron axe head, you don't go looking to modern physics or secular history to try and explain it away. You search other places within the text that speak more clearly to find the one true, unified sense of the narrative.
And Jones takes this rule very seriously. The quote we're looking at from the Westminster Confession vividly illustrates the absolute strictness of his interpretive framework. The supreme judge of meaning is the text itself. Period. This lens explicitly pushes back against molding ancient texts to somehow fit external modern data like evolutionary theories or secular archaeology. In this view, if the text says the iron floated, it literally floated as a matter of historical and grammatical fact. Any metaphorical or literary meanings, they have to remain entirely subservient to that literal self-contained truth.
Let's move on and see how this builds our final conclusion. It's actually kind of wild. We have taken a single 7-verse story about a lost tool, and by simply changing the lens we look through, we've arrived at 3 entirely different realities. The devotional lens extracted a metaphor for personal spiritual maintenance. The academic lens extracted a highly complex literary defense of Yahweh's generational fruitfulness. And the hermeneutical lens, it demanded we view it as a self-contained historical event that completely rejects external validation.
It really leaves us with a profound mystery to chew on. When we analyze a text, honestly any text at all, does the analytical lens we bring to it actually reveal its hidden objective meaning? Or does our framework simply act as a mirror, reflecting exactly what we were already looking for in the first place? Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking clarity, and I'll catch you next time.